Have you ever noticed how the moment you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop justifying your worth, he suddenly starts paying attention? That's not a coincidence. That's power. The truth is, a man often doesn't realize your value until your silence becomes louder than your explanations, and when you finally stop trying to prove yourself, that's when he starts wondering what he lost. Stay with me, because this shift in energy, it changes everything. Every time you feel the urge to explain yourself to someone, especially someone who's not treating you right, pause and ask yourself why. And why do you feel the need to defend your actions, your words, your boundaries? Often, it's not about clarity, it's about validation. We want someone to see our side so badly because we think if they do, they'll finally treat us the way we deserve. But chasing that kind of understanding from someone who's already made up their mind about how to value you is a never-ending emotional drain. You're not seeking peace, you're trying to change their perspective so you can feel enough. That's where the real issue begins. When you're constantly explaining, you're giving someone else the power to approve or disapprove of your truth. And that power is not theirs to hold. You don't owe anyone a justification for who you are. A woman who is secure in herself does not beg to be understood. She is already whole, whether someone sees her clearly or not. Explaining becomes exhausting because deep down, it's not about being heard, it's about being chosen. But that desire to be chosen makes us forget that we should be doing the choosing too. When you stop explaining yourself, you're not being cold or distant, you're setting a boundary. A boundary that says, I'm no longer trying to convince you that I'm enough. Either you see it or you don't. That shift creates peace within and tension outside, because the person who benefited from your over-explaining now has to deal with silence. And silence is powerful. It confronts people with their own behavior instead of letting them deflect with yours. When you over-explain, you start to believe you're the problem. You begin to think, maybe I should have said it better, or maybe he misunderstood me. But someone who wants to understand you will do the work to understand. You won't need a 12-step presentation just to get him to care. Explaining too much can become a habit that disguises itself as communication when really it's fear in disguise. Fear that if you stop talking, you'll lose your chance to be loved. But love isn't earned through explanation. Love shows up through consistency, respect, and effort, not through perfectly articulated justifications. When you break that habit, you regain control over your own narrative. There's a deep difference between expressing yourself and explaining yourself. Expressing is powerful. It's about stating how you feel. Explaining is what you do when you feel your emotions aren't valid until someone agrees with them. But your emotions are valid whether he gets it or not. That's the truth you need to stand on. If someone can only respect you when they're in full agreement with your choices, that's not respect, that's compliance. And you weren't made to shrink or mold yourself just to be accepted. When you stop explaining, you start to trust yourself more. You learn to sit with the discomfort of not being understood and realize that peace doesn't require explanation, it requires self-trust. So many women are taught that being loving means being accommodating, being endlessly patient, and always giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But there's a fine line between love and self-abandonment. You don't need to keep giving a man roadmaps to your heart if he's not even trying to show up. If he wanted to understand you, he would listen the first time. He wouldn't need an essay, a paragraph, or even a reminder. Your truth wouldn't feel like pressure to the right person. It would feel like clarity. When you stop explaining, you begin to live in your truth without apology. That alone changes everything. There's a certain type of man who starts paying attention when you stop explaining. Why? Because he can no longer use your words against you. He can't twist your intentions, can't invalidate your experience, can't wear you down through endless debate. And that's when you become powerful in his eyes, not because you're playing games, but because you've reclaimed your energy. You're not exhausting yourself trying to get someone to get it. You've let go of the illusion that understanding equals love. And that silence, that stillness, that withdrawal, it creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull people in. When you stop explaining, he starts wondering what you're thinking. And for the first time, he becomes the one overanalyzing. It's not your job to convince someone of your value. Your presence, your peace, your self-respect should speak for itself. But when you keep explaining, you mute that presence. You water yourself down trying to be palatable. And that's what makes someone take you for granted. When you stop explaining, you send the message. I've said what I needed to say. I don't need to repeat myself to be heard. That's strength, that's maturity, and that's what sets you apart from every woman he thought he could emotionally drain and still keep around. You're not here to audition for a place in someone's life. You're here to walk in with the certainty that you already belong, where you're valued. When you stop explaining, you become emotionally expensive. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because your time, your peace, and your words now come with value. You're not giving away your energy to someone who isn't investing back. You're done with the unpaid emotional labor of trying to be understood by someone who refuses to listen. That shift changes how people see you. They either rise to meet your energy or they leave. But what's left behind is never a loss. What's left behind is space for someone who doesn't require explanations to treat you right. Someone who doesn't need convincing to see your worth. And that's the man who stays. The man who truly respects you doesn't need you to explain why you have standards. He doesn't need a breakdown of your boundaries to honor them. He sees your silence not as punishment but as power. And if he's emotionally mature, he'll rise to the occasion instead of pulling away. But the ones who took advantage of your explanations, they start to panic when the dialogue ends. Suddenly, they feel your absence more than they ever heard your words. Because words they can dismiss, but distance, that they feel. And ironically, that's what makes them come back. Not because they finally understood, but because they finally felt the cost of misunderstanding you. So, the next time you feel the urge to explain why you're hurt, why you pulled back, or why you won't tolerate a certain behavior, pause, take a breath, and remind yourself, you don't need permission to feel what you feel. You don't need a closing argument to walk away from something that doesn't serve you. You don't need to justify your standards. The right person will respect your silence because they'll know it speaks volume. When you stop explaining, you stop begging to be seen and start showing up as someone who sees herself. That's when the game changes. That's when they come back. But by then, the question is, do you still want them? Mystery is a magnet. The less someone knows, the more they want to know. That's just human psychology. And in dating and relationships, this dynamic becomes even more powerful. When you're always explaining your every move, your every feeling, and your every thought, you remove the unknown. You give someone the full playbook before they've even shown up to the game. And what happens when someone feels like they've already figured you out? They stop being curious. They stop asking questions. They stop trying to understand you deeper because they assume they already know the answer. But when you hold something back, not in a manipulative way, but in a grounded, self-respecting way, it pulls people toward you. Not because you're hiding, but because you're choosing not to overshare. We often think that being transparent means being fully understood, but that's not always how it plays out. Sometimes, the more you explain, the more someone tunes you out. Because when you over-explain, You signal that you're trying too hard to be liked or accepted. It tells the other person that you don't believe your presence alone is enough. So instead of leaning into your natural confidence, you fill the silence with explanations, hoping they'll see your value. But real value is felt, not explained. You don't have to break yourself open to be appreciated. In fact, when you leave a little bit unsaid, you invite someone to step forward. You challenge them to be curious, to investigate, to engage on a deeper level. And that is what builds authentic connection. There's a reason people are more drawn to puzzles than answers. The mind is wired to seek what it doesn't understand. That's why, in relationships, when someone stops sharing everything, the other person becomes more alert. They lean in. They start to notice things they took for granted before. It's not because you're being distant or withholding love. It's because you're allowing space. Space is what gives words meaning. Silence is what gives moments weight. When someone can't fully read you, they start trying to earn more access to you. And that shift changes the energy of the relationship completely. You're no longer the one chasing. They become invested in trying to understand you more deeply. The problem with explaining everything is that it removes the emotional tension that makes attraction thrive. When a man knows exactly what you'll do, what you'll say, and how you'll react, there's no more edge, no challenge, no discovery. That predictability kills romance, because attraction isn't logical, it's emotional. It's felt in the pull between certainty and uncertainty. If he already has all the answers, there's nothing left to chase. But when you stop explaining yourself, you bring that edge back. You become someone he has to figure out, someone who doesn't hand over her soul on a silver platter. And that's the kind of energy that keeps someone thinking about you when you're not around. This doesn't mean you should play games or be manipulative. The power of mystery isn't about being confusing, it's about being selective. It's choosing what parts of yourself you reveal and when. It's trusting that not everything needs to be justified in real time. Some things can simply be felt. Some reactions don't need a reason. Some moments are more powerful when they're left to be interpreted. And that's where the emotional weight lies. When a man has to ask himself, what is she thinking? Why did she say that? What does she really feel? That's when his emotional investment grows. That's when you stop being another conversation and start being an experience. Men are not wired to value what is handed to them without effort, and if you're constantly giving away your inner world without letting him earn it, he won't value it the same way. The most powerful women aren't the ones who overshare to prove their openness. They're the ones who allow connection but still maintain an inner sanctuary. That sanctuary is what makes her unforgettable. It's what makes a man think about her long after the conversation ends, because he knows there's more to her, and he hasn't seen it all yet. That curiosity drives pursuit. That pursuit creates emotional depth. And emotional depth is what builds attraction that doesn't fade. You don't have to be mysterious by design. You just have to stop over-explaining as a survival tactic. When you let go of the need to be fully known immediately, you create room for a real connection to evolve. Relationships aren't built in a day. And when someone feels like they've gotten your entire emotional download within the first few weeks, it rushes the intimacy and kills the tension. Let him wonder sometimes. Let him miss you before you answer. Let him ask the questions instead of always volunteering the answers. Not because you're withholding, but because you're worth discovering layer by layer. That's how depth is built. Slowly, intentionally, and with respect for your own emotional rhythm. Think about the times someone left you wanting more. The people who made you wonder, what they were thinking, where their mind was at, or how they truly felt. That emotional space is what made them unforgettable. You weren't overwhelmed with their details, you were intrigued by their essence. That's the power of restraint. And when you bring that same energy into your relationships, people start paying more attention. They listen harder. They show up with more care because now they're working to understand you instead of being handed everything without effort. The absence of over-explaining forces emotional participation, and that's how emotional bonds grow stronger. We think that giving someone all the information makes things easier, but the truth is it often creates the opposite effect. It removes the tension that keeps a relationship alive. The best connections are the ones where both people remain curious about each other. That curiosity can't survive if one person is doing all the explaining. So when you stop trying to constantly explain who you are and why you are the way you are, you create balance. You allow space for someone to step into the conversation and contribute their own insight. You give him the opportunity to ask, to notice, to care. That emotional effort creates investment. And emotional investment is what turns intimacy. When you stop explaining yourself, you allow your actions to speak loud. And action always speaks louder than words. You don't need to defend your every move when your energy speaks volumes. Confidence is quiet. Self-respect is calm. It doesn't require a monologue, it just is. A woman who doesn't feel the need to explain her standards, her boundaries, or her silence becomes magnetic. Your energy is a currency, and how you spend it determines your emotional wealth. Every time you explain yourself to someone who isn't even trying to understand, you're making an investment that will never pay off. You're pouring your emotional resources into a conversation that's not evolving, into a person who's not listening, and into a situation that isn't changing. And what does that cost you? Peace, self-respect, time. You drain yourself trying to be understood by someone who's already decided they don't need to see your side. It's like yelling into a void, hoping it echoes back empathy. But it never does. Because understanding isn't something you can force. It's a choice the other person has to make. And if they're not making it, stop explaining. There's a moment when you have to ask yourself, why am I still trying to get this person to see me? And the honest answer often comes down to worth. You think that if they just understood where you were coming from, they'd value you more. But that's a trap. You're not meant to spend your life translating your heart to someone who refuses to speak your emotional language. If someone wants to understand you, they will. No amount of explaining will open the eyes of someone who's emotionally unavailable. And no amount of effort will make a man ready when he's committed to staying stuck. Your energy is sacred. Protect it from the people who only listen so they can defend, not so they can connect. When you spend your days justifying your feelings, you start believing they require justification. You begin to internalize the idea that unless someone agrees with how you feel, your emotions are invalid. But that's not true. Your feelings don't need to be approved to be real. You have the right to feel without having to write a thesis about it. The moment you decide that your emotions are enough, whether someone gets them or not, you step into your personal power. You stop looking outward for permission and start honoring your inner truth. And that shift changes the way you carry yourself. You go from over-explaining to simply expressing, and you let your energy speak for itself. You will always feel emotionally bankrupt if you're constantly spending your time proving yourself to someone who doesn't recognize your value. You can't build a stable emotional life with someone who requires a justification every time you speak up. That's not a relationship. That's a courtroom. Love shouldn't feel like you're on trial. Your intentions shouldn't be dissected, questioned, or doubted every time you set a boundary. When you explain yourself too much, you train them to expect that effort from you. And once they're used to it, they stop doing the emotional labor. You become the one holding the emotional weight of two people. That's when burnout happens. That's when resentment begins to grow. When you stop explaining yourself, you send a very clear message. I trust my own voice. That trust is magnetic. People notice when you no longer feel the need to explain why you're walking away, why you're silent, or why your boundaries exist. They feel the shift in your energy. You become less reactive, more grounded. You conserve your emotional power, and that conservation turns into presence. You become someone who doesn't chase closure because you've already given it to yourself. Someone who doesn't argue about being misunderstood because you understand yourself. And that level of internal clarity is something no explanation can ever achieve. It has to be claimed from within. Let's be honest, explaining yourself over and over again is emotional labor. It takes a toll on your mental health. You replay conversations in your head. You think of what you should have said differently. You write and rewrite messages, hoping this time he'll finally get it. That cycle is exhausting and is also unnecessary. The right person won't require multiple drafts of your truth to respect you. They'll hear you the first time. They'll notice your tone, your body language, your silence, and they'll care enough to respond to all of it, not just your words. That's emotional maturity. And if someone isn't capable of that, no explanation will create it. There is incredible power in silence, in not explaining, in walking away without giving someone the emotional safety net of knowing why. Sometimes your silence is the only language they'll understand, because while they might dismiss your words, they can't dismiss your absence. They can't ignore the emotional gap you leave when you stop showing up to defend yourself. That's when your energy becomes expensive, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you've stopped giving it away so freely. You've learned that you don't have to earn love through emotional labor. You simply have to love yourself enough to stop overspending your peace. You don't need to win an argument to win your peace. So many people think that getting the last word means getting closure, but real closure is internal. It comes from no longer needing validation to feel secure. You get to say, "This is how I feel," and leave it at that. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to dissect it. You don't need to be agreed with. When you stop engaging in emotional over-explaining, you reclaim your power. You take back your energy from conversations that were never going to end in understanding. You stop running in circles trying to be seen, and instead, you stand still and shine. We're conditioned to believe that the more we explain, the more likely we are to be loved. But love isn't earned by performance. It's not a debate, a pitch, or a strategy. It's alignment. If someone aligns with you emotionally, they'll meet you where you are. They won't need all the extra justifications. They'll simply feel the truth in your presence. And if they don't, that's not your burden to carry. You don't need to keep arguing your value. You are not a courtroom argument. You are a full, rich, worthy person whose feelings deserve respect, even when they're misunderstood, especially then. When you finally stop explaining yourself, you start attracting different energy. People who actually listen. You no longer depend on someone else's understanding to validate your truth. That's a breakthrough, because once you stop handing out emotional explanations to people who haven't earned them, you begin to connect more deeply with your own inner voice. You feel stronger. You trust yourself more. You no longer feel like you're on trial every time you express a need, a boundary, or a feeling. That self-trust becomes a magnet for respect, and that respect changes how people show up for you. especially men who once thought you'd always justify your presence. There's a subtle but powerful energy shift when you decide that your silence is just as valid as your words. It's not about playing games. It's about stepping into a grounded form of strength. Maybe they got comfortable knowing you'd always clarify, chase, or defend yourself, but when that dynamic changes, they notice. It unsettles them because now they don't have control over the emotional narrative. They can't predict your next move. And that unpredictability makes them pay attention. Not in a manipulative way, but in a real human way. Suddenly, your energy becomes something they have to earn access to, rather than something they can take for granted. This is when the dynamic in a relationship starts to balance out. When a man senses that you're no longer explaining yourself, he's either going to level up or fall away. And either outcome is a win, because you're no longer bending, twisting, or diluting yourself to be palatable. You're no longer performing emotional labor for someone who doesn't reciprocate. You're rooted now, rooted in your worth, your clarity, and your calm. That energy sets a new standard. It demands presence. It requires effort. And the right man, one who is emotionally mature and ready, will feel that difference. He won't just hear what you say, he'll feel the strength in what you, and that's what makes him lean in. You may notice that people treat you differently when you no longer over-explain. Not just men, but everyone. Some might resist at first. They were used to the old version of you, the one who would explain, apologize, justify, and soften every truth. But now, you're not shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You're not offering emotional disclaimers before expressing your needs. You speak with simplicity, you act with confidence, and when there's silence, you allow it. That confidence makes some people uncomfortable, especially those who relied on your doubt to maintain control. But your job was never to make others comfortable. Your job is to be authentic. And authenticity often begins where over-explaining ends. When a man truly cares, he doesn't need constant explanations to stay connected. He pays attention to the little things. He respects your space. He values your boundaries. He doesn't view your silence as punishment. He sees it as reflection. He doesn't demand emotional proof of your feelings. He trusts what's there. That kind of man doesn't chase validation because he doesn't need control. He shows up, listens, and creates safety for you to simply be. And when he senses that you're not over-explaining, he understands that this isn't distance. It's depth. It's a sign of emotional self-respect. It's your way of saying, I'm not here to convince, I'm here to connect. If you want to meet me, come with presence, not pressure. You'll start to feel lighter when you stop over-explaining emotionally, mentally, even physically. It's like releasing a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. You no longer feel the need to manage how others perceive you. You no longer stay up at night wondering if you said too much or not enough. You stop rewording texts 5 times before hitting send. You stop crafting arguments in your head for conversations that may never happen. That quiet inside of you, that's peace. That's what happens when you realize you never needed to be understood to be valid. You just needed to understand yourself. That clarity is what radiates as confidence, and it speaks louder than any explanation ever could. The moment you stop over-explaining, your emotional standards rise. You become more selective, not just about who you let into your life, but about who gets to stay. Because now, you're not driven by the need to be liked or accepted, you're guided by alignment. If someone can't respect your silence, they won't value your voice. If someone needs a long explanation to honor your boundary, they're not ready for real connection. Your new energy filters people out without you having to say much at all. The ones who are aligned won't need much explanation. They'll feel the clarity in your presence and rise to meet it. And the ones who don't, they'll fall away naturally. Let them. There's a quiet revolution that happens when you stop explaining yourself. You return to your center. You realize that not every moment needs commentary. Not every decision needs consensus. Not every emotion needs justification. You begin to feel powerful in your own stillness. That stillness isn't cold, it's grounded. It's warm, self-contained, and unshakable. It communicates self-awareness, not distance. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need you to confirm it. That is the kind of emotional stability that attracts mature relationships. Relationships built on respect, not control. Curiosity, not interrogation. Love, not performance. And the more rooted you become in this truth, the less explaining you'll ever feel the need to do again. Ultimately, the shift that happens when you stop explaining yourself is a deep return to self-trust. You begin to understand that your feelings, your instincts, and your voice are enough. You're not here to be everyone's emotional translator. You're not here to win every misunderstanding. You're not here to turn every disagreement into a TED Talk. You're here to grow, to connect, and to evolve with people who respect the real you, not the version of you that feels forced to justify her every move.